morning, everyone. Welcome to the Regulation and Innovation panel. I'm tempted to say regulation versus innovation, but I think that's a bit of a false construct, at least in the fintech context. But we're going to explore the dichotomy of these two elements in this panel. I'm so pleased to have entrepreneurs, regulators, and a member of the European Parliament here to discuss these issues. And Christo, I'd like to begin with you, if I may. You're the CEO, co-founder of TransferWise, which is one of the first and most visible fintechs to emerge in the European space. Kind of walk us through how you had to deal with regulation or the lack thereof when you began the company, and how TransferWise has evolved its relationship with regulators as you've grown.
Hey everyone, good morning. Thanks for showing up. It's a little bit early. We started 8 years ago now, and it was obvious to me from the beginning that if we were handling other people's money, we need to be licensed. This activity must be licensed. So we went to the what then was FSA in the UK and said, hey, we want to offer this service. Can we please have a license? And it worked. It took about 3 months or 4 months, but it actually worked. And I didn't hire any lawyers for this. I read a lot of documents. I wrote the application myself. I had interviews with the lady, and we got licensed. That was actually quite unusual in 2011, where most of the tech companies were kind of trying to keep away from regulation, trying to fly under the radar for a little bit. We took a different route, and our story has been working with regulators, initially acquiring licenses all around the world to be able to offer our services. We're an incredibly, due to the nature of our business, we're an incredibly international company. We're licensed in, I think, about 70 jurisdictions now, if we count all these United States as different jurisdictions, because you need to apply your own license to operate there. So we have a lot of licenses, a lot of relationships with regulators from Japan to Hong Kong to India to Brazil, etc., etc. So therefore, we're really kind of close with them. We need to work with the governments to be able to move money around the world. But maybe more interestingly, just to kind of introduce what where we are hoping to work more on regulators is creating a level playing field between us and the banks, and seeing what regulators can do to give a better service, or to make the market work in a way that people and businesses get better services.
Because your value proposition has been that the banks are overcharging customers when they transfer money overseas, and your marketing campaign was based around that. So in a way, you were you were going to the regulators and you were saying you need to make this more fair for consumers, and that's at the heart of what you do, right?
In fact, in 2014, we were 4 years old then. I went to see the chairman of the FCA, I guess your counterpart at the time, and I suggested that, hey, I think it would be a really great idea if people and businesses could see what the banks are charging them when they do currency conversions. Because of course what happens, and what many people don't understand and shouldn't have to understand, is that the bank tells you it costs 15 euros to send money to the US, but what they don't tell you is they take 5% in the exchange rate, just giving you a bad exchange rate. So that's, of course, obvious to bankers, probably obvious to everyone in the room, obvious to regulators, but not obvious to people on the high street. And I suggested to the FCA chairman that I think it would be a great idea for the consumers that you're supposed to protect to sort this out and ask the banks to disclose what their markup is and what they're charging when you start a payment. And he laughed at me. I think his analogy was that, imagine if the pump stations would have to display the price of crude oil and something like this. So we had a very funny conversation, funny for him, and as a protest. So I think that's what Ed is referring to. We demonstrated a couple of months later in front of Bank of England, taking our clothes off, that we have nothing to hide. That's where the marketing campaigns actually started from. And I think, if you don't mind handing over to Eva, then actually it's now 4 or 5 years later that the European Parliament has taken this up.
It's a good segue. You have 23 actions that are before you.
So basically, is this working? No. Yes.
Yes.
Now, yes. So basically, we've been working the last 4 or 5 years on a digital single market, which is something that you cannot explain to US easily because we have actually borders even in the digital market. So trying to remove these barriers, we faced all the problems that TransferWise faced. And we realized that the cost is huge. I think you mentioned, Dabrowski mentioned it's 1 billion for the internal market for cross-border payments. But OECD is claiming that it's 130 billion of hidden fees for transaction costs, or different fees that you don't even know for any kind of payment. So you understand that we have a huge potential to reduce that for the citizens and for the economy and create new opportunities. So I would say that basically you had the foresight to do what we claim that blockchain can achieve sooner or later. So part of the action plan was also to find ways to harmonize a bit the environment for the DLTs, crowdfunding, cross-border payments, and we're getting there, but not as fast as we would like, because we have, of course, resistance, and we have people that wouldn't like to see open banking happening because it disrupts their profession, their jobs. And we're trying to remove these barriers too, besides the virtual barriers. But I think the cross-border payments directive, it's launched already 2018. And I hope we will manage to improve it even more, which means if you make a payment in Europe from one country to another, you don't get the fees that you used to have. And it's more safe. We have better authentication, so this means you're more safe. The banks have a responsibility if something goes bad, if something goes wrong, to reimburse you. And we're trying also to make sure that we have the non-Euro countries with the Euro countries to be able also to have a more harmonized environment. And this would, of course, help not just the investors, but the consumers. I don't know if you have faced that, but sometimes you use your credit card and it's rejected, even in Europe. You cannot order something online. So, and one thing that we also do is to remove also the geo-blocking. We did that a year ago. It seems funny to talk about that. It seems like ancient history, but actually, when you were trying to enter a site from Greece to France, you could be redirected and you could not even order anything. Or you have different access to different values. So you want to order something online, a book, you have a different price and I have a different price, besides the tax. So we're trying to remove all of these things.
On the hidden fees aspect, you said the OECD came out with a study that was 130 billion euros?
For all the hidden fees.
For all the hidden fees. So as the European Parliament, as you and your colleagues move to address that, are the banks resisting?
Of course.
What are they doing?
Trying to delay the unstoppable thing that's happening, which is innovation. So we have to find the right balance to make sure that innovation will happen. We will have, we work with the standards, we work with the definitions, we try to create new boxes of regulation, not to fit everything in the old boxes, like not everything is a security, for example, for the tokens. So we try to do that. At the same time, you know that with PSD2, the payments directive for open banking and GDPR, they're trying to give less data. But if you want fintech to work exactly what you're discussing here, you have to make sure that banks will allow access to data, right?
Well, that's going to be a very big theme this year as we get ready to bring in the standards in September to really implement PSD2 and open banking, and there's been, I think it's like some banks kind of get it or are on board, others maybe not so much.
I can tell you that a couple of years ago, we had several meetings that there were private meetings trying to explain to the Commission and to people involved that us also, basically I believe that the Parliament wants to democratize the system even more, and this is something we have to convince also the Commission to do in the Council. So we were talking about that, and we removed the barriers. We have excellent commissioners trying to help us out, and the banks, I think they just needed more time, because you cannot avoid that. If you can have safer, cheaper, better results, and you have to outsource things to companies like TransferWise, of course.
Robert, your organization, you oversee the financial markets in France. There's been an explosion of innovation that have happened in financial markets even before fintech was coined, the phrase was coined. It's crucial because you're talking about stability. You're talking about the securities markets. How do you try and find that balance between protecting the markets but also encouraging innovation?
It's very difficult to find this right balance. But when you look at traditional finance is often too expensive, too slow, too national, to some extent too prudent, and not that secure, actually. So there is a need to innovate, and there is a need to new. And when you look at regulation is very good at stifling innovation, either by prohibiting it or just by, it's more insidious. It's just that you impose such an administrative burden, you request so many safeguards that at the end of the day you destroy any business case, and it could be viewed as a barrier to entry for newcomers, and that's something. So you need to find the right balance between the fostering innovation, safeguarding financial stability, having the consumer protection in mind, and at the end of the day, having real business case for the people innovating. And there is no magic solution for that. It's a case-by-case basis, depending on the domain of the innovation. Payment system is one of them, but there are many others, and the solutions should be tailored to the domain. In some case, you mentioned the idea of the sandbox, which is very common.
That's in the UK, the FCA Sandbox, which they pioneered to try and bring regulators and entrepreneurs together.
It looks very attractive, but you should know that at the end of the day, you are no waivers on any part of the regulation, because you can't actually, and you try to implement some type of proportionality principles in the implementation of the regulation, but you have no real room for maneuver in that field.
So are you saying that you don't think the sandbox approach
is a good one,
so good,
but it looks it looks better from the outside, and when you are inside it, the room you have actually in the sandbox is not that big, because the European regulation is there, and it doesn't give you many possibility to waive some requirements. Perhaps I'm wrong, but you have the experience.
Well, Christo, I know TransferWise did not go through the...
We're trying to correct that. It's part of the action plan, the sandboxes, okay? So it's coming. I said it's slow, but it's coming. Okay.
We will see. But for the time, no, it's coming. Fine, good. We will see. And
what are you trying to correct exactly on that?
In the action plan, we have, besides the DLC, try to have a harmonized environment and standards. We try to give them legal certainty. We do this for the crowdfunding. So this means you can now use crowdfunding platforms cross borders in Europe, and increased from 1 million to 8 million. And now we're moving to sandboxes. So I think it's going to be the next mandate after the elections to have sandboxes in EU to test innovative solutions without worrying that you might not comply with all the rules that he just mentioned.
I see. Christo, TransferWise did not go through the sandbox approach, but what's your take on that? Do you think that that's a good method for stoking innovation and getting regulators on board, or are there issues with it?
I'm not convinced we're the right people to ask this, just because we didn't go through.
Right.
And I agree with Robert that it's a very awkward thing where the regulator should create the same rules for everyone, and then they say, hey, here's a sandbox, you can have different rules. Like, that shouldn't really work. So whenever we've come across sandboxes, it's kind of trying to solve some regulatory problem that the guidance or the underlying law isn't modern enough. So in our case, it's often because it's assuming that money is carried in bags and trucks around the world, which it of course isn't anymore. And it kind of is designed for a different world, and it hasn't been able to adapt. So in our view, I think the proportionality has to be written in law. I think that's the real outcome. And the faster we can iterate on the regulation just to modernize it so that people don't have to show up to get onboarded to services, like face-to-face verification maybe isn't as useful as it was in the past. Things aren't carried around physically, but over the digital channels. I think these are around the world, and actually Europe is in a pretty good place compared to, for example, Japan, where in order to onboard a person, you'd have to send them physical mail in the post to verify that that's where they live.
Do you really? Still, physical mail. Okay.
Exactly.
I see. I'd like to segue to the topic of data, if I could. I mean, in the PSD2 era, open banking era, just in fintech in general, data is everything, managing it, leveraging it. But it comes up against privacy concerns. And I think throughout the conference, we've probably all seen in various panel discussions these two clashing ideas of let the data flow, but then we have GDPR and all of those protections. Can we just can you pick up on that, just that this tension between the free flow of data, but also the privacy that's enshrined in GDPR?
Well, basically, what we're trying to do is to have regulation based on principles. Not too much regulation, but it has to be regulation and smart regulation. After the Cambridge Analytica, I think everybody realized that we need rules so that the companies could comply and not feel exposed, them and their consumers and the customers. So, for example, whoever controls data, we need to know that he's the responsible one for that. We have to be able to get explanation for what they do with our data, but this doesn't mean we stop the circulation and the flow of data. But we just want everybody to be more careful. I don't want them to sell everything I give them without my consent. So silence is not consent. And just clicking one yes, this doesn't mean you can have everything. I can give you one example. So if you have, for example, an insurance company and you get data that I'm Google searching chronic disease, and you have access to this search, and I could be excluded from your company, I have the right to know why I was excluded. I think we all believe that this is useful, besides the ones that want to profit by using their data. But this data, they have to be more careful. And I think this is the essence of GDPR. It's evolving. Wherever we see that it creates problems, it would change. For example, they were asking me about blockchain and GDPR. You cannot stop blockchain. It's a technology that we have. So maybe GDPR will have GDPR 2 or plus. That's going to correct all the problems. And because you talked about innovation and new economy, shared economy create huge problems. So when we had Uber 4 years ago, I was talking in the parliament with my colleagues and they didn't know what Uber was. We had 4 years ago, they didn't actually. And there was a lady very upset and she said, well, they don't follow the rules, we have to ban them. So innovation is about breaking the rules, right? Being smart enough, not fraud. Breaking the rules is okay. If
break the rules, but not the law.
Not the law, but you have to
Okay.
protect the citizens. If you do something that's better for the people, then the law has to adapt very fast. So this is what we're trying to do.
But is GDPR and this free-flowing data that's so critical to so many fintech propositions, is something like GDPR, does it have a chilling effect on how you might create new products or how you might develop a new service? I mean, Christo, how has TransferWise kind of handled that? Has it had any significant impact? Or?
For us, GDPR came very easy. I think there was like half a week of work putting some new notices up. But that was us. We found it really easy because I think it's partly because it's not directed to us. We're not selling people's data, and people are not the products. Moving money is the product, and people are paying for it.
Right.
So for us, it didn't really make a huge difference. But I kind of I do have some feelings about things like cookie laws, for example.
Cookie laws.
You maybe don't even remember that. That was maybe 6-7 years ago. There's a law that we have to tell the users about the cookies that we store cookies on them. They pop up all the time, and we've gotten so used to it. No one's gotten benefit from that law.
So you think that should really go away?
That should have never gotten implemented. But I just don't know why it hasn't gone away.
I think it's going away because we realized the problem. The point was to give options to citizens to opt out if they want. But the way it happened, it was just like, yes, just leave my screen. So we have to make sure that it would start by default to protect citizens, and then they can change it back to get more features or something, but we're trying to work on that. I agree. I was not there when they prepared this regulation. It's a bit annoying.
It's a bit annoying. Robert, one of the major issues that you focused on in your organization, of course, is the advent of cryptocurrencies. And I mean, you're on the securities markets, and all of a sudden you have to deal. Can you just share with us your approach on how you're approaching Bitcoin and Ether and the other cryptocurrencies?
I think we have tried to develop an innovative approach because it's partly optional. The idea is in some areas there should be strong requirements on AML, CFT issues, strong requirements on the way you solicit the customer. You can say. But in other fields, you can just give the choice. And that's the way we are handling the issue for crypto in France. That's pending in the parliament right now. To give the option. If you want to make an ICO, you can make an ICO, but you could have a visa from the regulator. It's optional. If you want to provide services on crypto, you can develop a platform, whatever you want. That's it. But you could have a license for that. And it incentivizes the ecosystem to go to ask a visa, to ask for a license. And if you have that, it will bring more confidence with the ecosystem, with the intermediaries.
So you support a licensing regime for crypto?
Optional license.
An optional license.
So then everyone will have the choice. The customer, the project provider, and whatever. And we have in France a lot of blacklist of dangerous products or illegal platforms or whatever. 600 items on this blacklist. Now I want whitelist. Whitelist, project with a visa, platform with a license, and then you're free. that's something pending from a pending a European approach of this of the crypto world. That's the way we are trying to develop the approach in France. Optional.
Good.
Yes, we're working on that. So we have the European Blockchain Observatory that it's going to be there, trying to understand the market and get all the players there. And what I believe what you're saying is like a registry, perhaps, of some levels of verification. If an ICO fulfills some requirements, if it's in EU, where it's based, who is the legal responsible, and the jurisdiction, and if it's a security, if it's a utility, if it's scam, if it provides you with just a great idea, you can support it, but you get nothing for that. So they have to state exactly what they are. And we're going to get there. We talked about that on the crowdfunding file, but it was not included, so we believe that it needs a separate file for that, for the ICOs. So it's coming also, I believe, after June. We're going to have the file coming, and we're going to work on this, hopefully in the best direction.
We thought that we couldn't wait for that, for Europe.
So, okay.
No, this is good. But each member state will do what they believe, of course. Right. But we need a harmonized environment so that if somebody, it's like crowdfunding, if somebody wants to use it beyond France, France has done an excellent job there. They have gotten like 2,000 cases, I think, and they managed to identify some patterns and to make sure that we have the registry prepared. So we're going to work very close.
Excellent. Very good. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Christo, Robert, and Eva.
Thank you.